2019, we said this morning, would be our year of spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity means that we are going to grow stronger in the Lord. But this month, we are going to title this month under the subtopic of a new life resolution. I thank God for the church. Somebody paying attention. A new life resolution. But I want to tag this message this morning. Grow up in this thing. Grow up in this thing. Grow up in this thing, meaning we've got to stop drinking the milk of the word. We got to stop living like babies with pull-ups on. Come on, somebody. We need to start living a life of intentional growth and spiritual maturity. But I think it's important that we look at John 8 because there are some of us in John chapter 8. There are some of us caught somewhere in verse 1, between verse 1 and verse 12. But I believe it's important that we see some real life examples of what we see when we try to look at everybody else as being guilty of the death penalty. Y'all ain't heard it this way. I remember there's a man by the name of George Junior Stinney. Mr. George Stinney is very synonymous within the black community, particularly in the state of South Carolina. I'm going to call him Master Stinney. You see, Master Stinney, it resonates because something happened in 1940s. He lived in a small town called Alculo, South Carolina. Alculo, South Carolina was approximately 60 miles southeast of Columbia, South Carolina, the capital. It was typical in 1944 that you had those little small towns in the South that were separated along racial lines. They were separated along economical lines. They were separated on educational lines, but it was always convenient. There was a railroad track between Mr. Stinney's community and everybody else. March 1944 would be a time that would live in infamy, if I could use the words of one of our presidents, Mr. Roosevelt. See, in 1944, March came where two little girls were walking down the railroad track near a ditch in the black side of Alculo, South Carolina. These two little girls were looking for some flowers along the ditches. And it is said that Mr. Stinney and his sister saw these two little girls. They were looking for flowers because it was a pretty day in March. But then we find later that these two little girls were murdered. These two little girls were found dead in the watery part of the ditch on the black side of Alculo, South Carolina. It was said that these two little boys by the name of George Stinney and Johnny Stinney were brought into the Clarendon County Sheriff's Office in 1944. These young boys were brought in, and it was said that they were questioned. Johnny Stinney was released, but George Stinney was kept in the jailhouse. It came out in the newspaper that George Stinney allegedly confessed to the murders of these two little white girls. It was said that Mr. Stinney, as soon as he had committed to this quote-unquote alleged crime, it took them less than an hour to get together the jury. It took them less than a day to get the trial started. And within 24 hours, they had found Mr. George Stinney guilty of murder. But the story doesn't stop there. It said that within 84 days, it went from the time he was arrested to his execution. See, Mr. Stinney was sent to prison, and he didn't have due process. Mr. Stinney did not have anyone to argue his case. It was said that his court-appointed lawyer was a tax commissioner. He was the one that was standing in the gap between freedom and being dead. It said that he did not even have the opportunity to argue against the evidence because there was no evidence connecting Mr. Stinney to the crime. Within about a short amount of time, in 83 days, Mr. Stinney was in the Columbia Correctional Institution. It was said that Mr. Stinney was 5'1". He was not tall enough to be in the electric chair like some of the other men. Mr. Stinney had to strap him down in the electric chair. They said it was so short he had to sit on a Bible to be executed because his arms could not reach the top of the electric chair. They said that his head was so small that the headrest could not fit on the top of his head. And when they shot the 2,400 volts through his body, the hat fell off. What is so typical about this? What is so crazy? What is so controversial about this execution? Mr. Stinney was 14 years old. He was the youngest person ever executed for a crime he did not commit. I'm preaching to somebody this morning. He was executed like a grown man. He was treated like someone who knew the law, but he was killed over a crime he did not commit. But there's a good side to Mr. Stinney's story. You see, 60 some odd years later, 2 lawyers in South Carolina brought it before the state and said that we don't see the evidence. Y'all need to help me preach this thing. We don't see the evidence why Mr. Stinney was executed. We don't understand why 84 days went from the time he was arrested to the time he was executed. We don't understand why the lawyer didn't bring forth an appeal. Because there was no appeal to this execution. We don't understand why none of the sheriffs that were brought forth a sworn statement were not asked questions during the trial. And so we will ask the state to retrial Mr. Stinney. Bring Mr. Stinney's name back before the court. Bring the people who may have witnessed this injustice back in front of the judge so some right things should be done. But instead, the courts decided to give him clemency. Instead, they commuted Mr. Stinney's sentence. In other words, they said on the books he committed a crime, but in 2014, the state of South Carolina said he did not commit a crime. And I stopped by to tell somebody, somebody's got a death sentence on your life right now. But I know a man that's named Jesus, that he sits in the Supreme Court. I'm talking to somebody this morning. Somebody has killed your name out in the street. Somebody has sent you to a death sentence. Somebody got you sitting in the electric chair. But I know somebody that says, I find no fault. But there's somebody that found fault in the state commuting his sentence. It was the family of the 2 little girls. Because they said, this has been going on. They said this has been over 60 years ago. They said, we don't remember the alleged deathbed confession from the one who actually killed those little girls. But because they don't want to open up old wounds, they said, why don't we just let live? But I stopped by to tell you, we got to grow up in this thing. There's some stuff that you just can't let live in the body of Christ. There's some stuff that we've done in our lives. There's some stuff we turned a blind eye to. There's some people that we hurt in our lives. And I stopped by to tell somebody, we're not turning a blind eye to sin in 2019. We're not turning a blind eye to the assassination of people's character in 2019. We're not standing idly by while we watch our family commit sin. We need to grow up. We need to grow up in this thing. I find it very ironic that this particular passage of scripture, John chapter 8, we find this woman who was caught in the act of adultery. And some of us have heard sermons preached about this woman who was caught in the act of adultery. Many of us have heard questions asked about the woman who was not only caught in the act of adultery, but all of us have asked the question, what about the man? Does anybody know where the man was? Because last I checked, you can't commit adultery by yourself. Do I have a witness this afternoon? And I believe that so many people have tried to theorize why this happened. Why didn't they bring the man before the Sanhedrin? Why didn't they bring people who were involved in this crime before Jesus? But can I ask you a question? Does it change what she did? And we're just like those very people who ask the question, what about them? We're always saying, God, what about them? The question I bring before you as a mature Christian, what does that have to do with what you did? I can't get no help this morning. I believe it is important that we grow in the Word. Let's stop looking at what God is going to do in other people's lives. And make sure that we clean up our own lives. instead of being like a child and saying, I wasn't by myself. See, I wasn't going to get no shouts this morning. You thought you were going to be told you on this the year of expectation. You need to stop living in sin. Well, I can't get no help this morning. George Stinney's execution fits well within the context of John chapter 8. This account of a woman who's about to be stoned falls in line with all types of executions that we've seen take place in our very own lives. And can I help teach this thing? You see, Bible scholars, it is believed that this particular account may have been left out either in the original manuscript or it was moved from one part of the Bible unto another part of the Bible. And while we may be able to argue whether or not it was in the original Greek text, one thing for sure, it did happen. And if you don't believe it happened in the Bible, you can look at your own life. There's some people whose character has been assassinated. And there are some of you, somebody tried to stone you themselves. Boy, get quiet in here again. You see, a woman was about to be executed for a crime of adultery. And the scribes and the Pharisees claimed that she was caught in the act and brought before our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ, to have a witness. And we have likely heard of all types of accounts of people who have done things, but we didn't see it ourselves. There might have been an account of someone committing some type of sin, but we're the first ones to put their names on the signboard. There have been people who have done things that we know were wrong. The sad part is we were with them when they did it. Somebody even asked the question, the reason why they couldn't find the man, because he might have been one of the Pharisees. But I believe it says in verses 4 and 5 of John 8, they say unto him, talking about Jesus, they said, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Verse 5 says, Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what saith thou? Let me tell you what it comes down to when people start making accusations. You got to stop acting like you don't know better. Stop acting like you don't know better. What are you talking about, preacher? We know the story. We know that the religious folk, we ain't talking about Bethlehem, we talking about other religious folk. The religious folk that saw this woman, they must have been following her, minding her business. We don't have nobody in the church following folk on Facebook, come on somebody, minding somebody else's business. They caught that woman in the act of adultery. That means they knew where she lived. That means they knew the man she was sleeping with. But it strikes me as strange. They go before Jesus and said, Master, this is what Moses said. But they forgot that not only did Jesus know the law, but they knew Caesar's law. What are you talking about, preacher? This was a time where the Sanhedrin court could not commit a death sentence to anybody that had done something against the law. The only people that could send somebody to death was the Roman church. It was the Roman court. It was Caesar's army. They were the only ones that could kill somebody that had committed a crime. But you got people in the church that's just like the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They're trying to get you caught up in some mess. They're trying to see how holy you are. They're trying to see how righteous you are. And instead of trying to help somebody, they're trying to tear somebody down. We got to grow up in this thing. We got to walk like Christians. We ought to talk like Christians. We ought to love like Christians. We need to stop acting so ignorant in the church. We need to stop acting like we didn't come to Sunday school. We need to stop acting like we didn't come up like these children and saying these Bible verses. But every now and then, it's the church folk that's trying to tear somebody down and trying to get somebody else to do their dirty work for them. We need to grow up in this thing. We need to grow up in this thing. But not only did they need to stop and start acting like they know better. But here's something else we find in verse 6 through 8. Verse 6 through 8, he says, this they said, tempted him. I told y'all it's going to be thick this morning. That they might have to excuse him and accuse him. But Jesus stooped down. And with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. Reason why I believe he stooped down to write something in the ground. The reason why he acted like he didn't hear him, because he was telling them, y'all ain't fooling nobody. I stand behind this pulpit this evening, church, to tell you, you ain't fooling nobody. Grandma used to say, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people none of the time. I wish I had a church this afternoon. They kept asking Jesus to pass judgment on the adulterers. But what he was actually doing was sitting in his courtroom. If you know anything about the Supreme Court, the judges have to write their opinion. They have to write down what they think is right. I don't know what Jesus was writing on that day, but I believe he was writing down an opinion. He was writing down something that was taking place. But he wasn't just writing down the adulteress's life, but he was writing down the life of those Sadducees and Pharisees. He was passing judgment on those in the church. He was writing his opinion. I know the law of Moses, but I also know the law of Caesar. But somebody needs to know that he is the ultimate judge. He is the righteous judge. And he was writing down his opinion. The question I have for you, did he write down your name in the sand that day? Did he write down his opinion before he was preparing his judgment? I stopped by to tell the church, you ain't fooling anybody. He was with you when you did it. You ain't got to ask him who was with the woman in the house, because he know who was with the woman. He created the man. He created the woman. He was probably standing in the corner in the room when he was cutting up in the room, doing everything that he was big and bad enough to do. But I stopped to tell somebody, when you were doing what you were doing, he was in the room watching what you was doing, and he was writing down all the stuff you did on Friday, all the stuff you did on Saturday, all the stuff you did at 2 o'clock this morning. But I stopped by to tell somebody, we got to grow up in this thing. We got to grow up and be the Christians that we call ourselves to be. Somebody say it. We need to grow up in this thing. We need to stop playing church. We need to grow up in this thing. But here, verses 9 through 11 is what gets me. And then we're going to take our seat. 9 through 11. He says, and they which heard, let me back up. He goes back and he says to them in verse 7. So when they continue to ask him, he lifted up himself. In other words, he stood up. He finished writing. And he said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. But this is what I like about it. And again, he stooped back down and he kept on writing. But this is what I need for the church as we get ready to close. Verse 9 says, and they which heard it. Y'all didn't hear that. They which heard it, being what? Convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one. But guess who was the first ones to leave? Beginning at the elders. Beginning with the seasoned saints. Beginning with the pastor. Beginning with the deacons. Beginning with the deaconess. Beginning with the ushers. Beginning with the mothers. Beginning with everybody on the church road. Those that know the word. Those that study the word. Those that try to use the word to cover up their mess. He said every last one of them was convicted of their own conscience. Even until the last. And Jesus was left alone. And the woman standing in the midst. We're going to get on out of here. But can I give you this last one? You're too old to be playing church. You're too old. You're too old. You've been climbing a long time. Been putting on a long time. All the elders were convicted. You're too old to be playing church. The scribes and the Pharisees knew that they tried fooling Jesus. But in their attempt to fool Jesus, they wound up being convicted of their own sin. But they were not the only ones that were caught up in the conviction. You see, verse 9 lets us know that the elders were the first ones to be convicted of their sin. But then it turned out that everybody that was in the witness of what was taking place had to go back and look over their very own lives. Everybody that was standing there waiting for that woman to get stoned had to go back in their own closet and find out who they slept with last week. Everybody had to go out in their own closet and figure out when they turned up at the club. Oh, I'm talking to somebody. Everybody that wanted to stand and watch somebody get stoned had to think about when they were doing their own stuff. But I like what Jesus told the elders. He said, throw a stone if you ain't done nothing. Throw a stick if you ain't done nothing. But every last one of them had to be convicted because they knew the word and they know they tried to fool Jesus. But I stopped by to tell somebody this morning, as old as you are, as young as you are, as long as you've been in church, as long as you've been preaching, as long as you've been singing in the choir, you're too old to be clowning in the church today because the very same stone that you trying to watch somebody get hit with, somebody got a stone with your name. The doors of the church are open.